We're remembering the old food pyramid back in the early 90s. You remember the triangle, the one plastered on the wall in health class? It had breads and grains at the bottom, suggesting that we need to consume those the most to maintain a healthy diet. Then fats and oils were showcased at the very top, meaning we need to limit our intake of those. We remember that, right? Well, this January, the Department of Agriculture released a totally new set of dietary guidelines, and the food pyramid looks, well, very different from the one you probably remember. It's high in protein, dairy, and healthy fats. And here to help us break down the changes is Kuti Mack, speaker and fitness philosopher. Kuti, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Hilton. I'm going to get one of them in.
So tell us, what is this new food pyramid? What are the big changes that you've seen, and why does it look so different?
So the new food pyramid is, like you said, the Department of Agriculture's revamped recommendations for how people should eat. The old food pyramid, like you said, was a pyramid. You looked at it, it was small at the top, it was wide at the bottom. This food pyramid is inverted. So it's big at the top and it deltas down to a fine point. At the top now, what visually is represented are meats, cheeses, dairies, things of that nature, implying that we need to eat more protein and more healthy, full fats. At the very bottom is our grains, which are at the peak, which is now inverted at the bottom, suggesting that we need less grains, less starchy carbs, less breads, etc.
And why do you think these changes came about? Is there any, in this current climate, we're always thinking, a battle of health versus politics, and how does this follow the money, right?
Yes.
What is causing the change in the food pyramid at this time?
And you nailed it. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do believe in the truth. I'm not anti-capitalist. I want to make money too, but I believe there's responsibility in capitalism. I am not oblivious, especially once I dove into wellness and nutrition and really stepped into this thing with the ethos of I want to help people be their best daily via natural interventions, whole food interventions. Nothing against science, nothing against medicine rather, but it is science. Like the body responds to certain foods certain ways, and the body's actually designed to help itself repair. Now, to answer your question, if you go back, so I'm in my 50s. So I remember when I was young and first came to the country, there was a big push on low fat. People were having heart attacks. They attributed it to fat. And so basically there was this whole movement. And when I was young, you would see all kinds of new foods being introduced via their fat content, 30% less fat, 30% less fat. But the things that make food taste good to human beings are sugar, salt, and fat. If you have those three things in any kind of combination, undoubtedly, that food is going to taste amazing to you, regardless of whatever your health endeavors are. So once you remove fat from something, to make it still taste like food and not taste like paper, you had to increase the salt and the sugar. Then what started happening was high blood pressure, hypertension started to become a bit of an epidemic as I started to get a little bit older. This is, and again, in my 50s. So as my students, when I lecture them, call it in the late 1900s. I almost flunked the kid off of that. Late 1900s. I was like, excuse me. Anyway, so in the late 1900s, there was this thing where it was a de-emphasis on sodium. So now you start seeing low sodium, reduce sodium. But definitely if you take the salts out, you got to ramp up what? The fat and the sugar. So, but the sugar is the one thing that we as human beings just are addicted to easily, immediately. It's introduced to our systems, and once it is, we're hooked, whether we're diabetic or not. So what happens is now there's this influx of sugar, and then they try to say, okay, we're going to reduce the sugar, so we're going to give you these fake sugars, these alternative sugars, these sweeteners, Sweet and Low, Splenda, NutraSweet, all these things started coming up, but then those things were causing cancer. So what happens is sugar becomes prevalent. And as you flash forward into the 21st century, what you have is this abundance of people who, if they aren't already diabetic because they were born that way, type 1, they're eating their way into diabetes because there's so much sugar just added into the foods to make it taste like something. So now people are type 2 diabetic, and to reduce those things pharmaceutically, they're introducing interventions that have this side effect where, we're starting to lose weight because we're inhibiting your sugar absorption, GLP-1s. When that happens, though, what comes with that is these GLP-1s, while they help people who are diabetic and And there are natural interventions that we could talk about offline, but while they help people who are diabetic, now you see a proliferation of people who are using them simply to fight obesity. And, if you're a last resort, I totally understand it. I'm not shaming anybody for that, but just keeping it real within the context of our conversation, those GLP-1s inhibit the body's ability to really synthesize protein. So what happens is now you're starting to lose muscle mass. You're losing weight, but you're losing muscle mass. So so now when you start picking up foods that used to highlight how many grams of carbs they didn't have, or how much sodium they didn't have, or how much fat they didn't have, now what do you see? 14 grams of protein. Right. You start to see protein labeled on everything. And I promise you, if you follow the money and you follow the lobbyists, and if you follow Big Pharma, you follow the GLP-1 situation, you'll see that that's why the push for protein is now thrust upon us. Everything from meat lovers to double patty burgers to, even with healthy foods, the food pyramid. So now they're emphasizing visually to you that you need to eat way more meat. But the thing is, what we do need is protein. Whether you're a vegan, vegetarian, or just a carnivore like everybody else that's left, you do need protein. You need lean, responsibly prepared source protein. But if you look at the pyramid, it's got meat and cheese and dairy at the top, and it doesn't really speak to the ramifications of the saturated fat that you might be ingesting if you just look at that pyramid. So if you read the fine print of the updated 21st century pyramid, it'll still emphasize eating vegetables and fruit and things in balance. So what I like to do with my BYBD philosophy is I like to emphasize the things that are on program, i.e. the things that will help you reach your goals. So whatever your health goal, your fitness goal, your maintenance goal is, we figure what that is out, and then we will prescribe the stuff that falls in that range in a healthy, natural way. Once you figure out what's in that range, I encourage people to do those things. And I don't really worry about what you're not supposed to do, because that's when it starts to get a little too heavy to lift in your brain. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Makes complete sense. And, the question in my head that was when you were speaking was, did the pendulum switch swing in the opposite direction from sugar to high protein consumption at this point? So for those viewers that are not on GLP-1s, right, and they don't have to compensate for what the side effects of that medications are, how much protein is too much for them? Is there any consequence of that? And then also, when you're telling them to take in protein, should they do protein shakes? Should they do meats? Should they, powders? What exactly should they be looking for? Because it is everywhere, right? But what is actually good for them? Great
question. Typically, the ratio is somewhere in the neighborhood of between 1 to 2 grams per, almost like 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight is your recommended intake of protein. Now, the most responsible ways to get these proteins is, especially if you're not talking about somebody who has exceptional circumstances, like you just talked about GLP-1s or any kind of deficiencies. If you're really just trying to maintain and just be healthy, the most responsible way to get those things are through wholly sourced protein, things like fat, like fish. If you're going to eat meat, lean meat, fish, poultry, eggs, 2% fat, plain Greek yogurt. Now, as far as shakes and supplements, I'm not a huge supplement guy. If circumstances dictate that you must take them, fine. But I always say, let's see how far nature can take you first, and then see where we're deficient there. Because a lot of times we just jump into the supplement pool, and a lot of things come with those supplements. A lot of times, if it's a shake or a powder, it's got a whole bunch of other ingredients in there that work against what you're trying to do. So, and nature is great. Nature gives you all kinds of sources of protein. So anything that's a seed, flax seed, hemp seed, chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, anything that's a seed is a really great source of protein that's not plant-based. Quinoa it looks like a grain, but it's actually a seed. So you can substitute rice for quinoa. And if weight loss is not your goal, quinoa is an amazing source of protein because it has the 9 essential amino acids that meat give you. And it's the only plant-based form of protein that gives you that complete profile. Edamame is great. Edamame basically are soybeans. Now, soy processed, I vehemently vote against, because soy processed is, it reacts in our body like an estrogen. It's a phytoestrogen. And so all the things, and women are a lot more attuned to this than men are, but we're both susceptible to the ramifications of an over inundation of of estrogen in our system. So that's like soft chest tissue, getting hippie, water retention, those kind of things come with having too much estrogen in your system. So, and talking about packaged foods, like we were just talking about earlier, almost every packaged food, unless you look and it says otherwise, has some level of soy and sugar in it. So there's so much soy coming at us and sugar coming at us before we even are aware of it, that's why you see the uptick in people who are type 2 diabetic or who are pre-diabetic and being aggressively treated with pharmaceuticals. And if you're talking about people who are searching for sources of protein, I would say go whole foods first. So go with nuts, go with seeds, go with fish, go with, eggs if you tolerate them, if you don't have an aversion to dairy, 2% fat, Greek yogurt, very high in protein as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you try to be healthy, you're trying to drink soy milk, and then you hear that it's actually not the thing that you necessarily should run towards every single day. And one thing on a new pyramid, different as far as a drink, it also mentioned alcohol, that there is no safe amount of alcohol. Back in the day, you used to have an allowance for 1 drink a day for women and 2 for men. Why do you think that's changing with this new pyramid?
Well, number one thing I always try to tell people, moderation is such a fallacy when it comes down to being healthy. First and foremost, our culture doesn't enforce moderation. Number 2, it is hard to tell somebody who's addicted to something to stop doing the thing that they're addicted to. Not even talking about alcohol addiction at this point, but just sugar in general. When people are talking about how that you could have, 1 or 2 glasses of wine and it was good for your heart and all that kind of stuff. The chemical compounds in wine that are good for you are the exact same chemical compounds that are in grape juice. Mm-hmm. But if you drink grape juice, you might not get drunk or get behind the wheel, inebriated.
Right.
So there are safer alternatives for sure. Alcohol, from where I sit, everything I do when it comes down to my nutrition and fitness consultation always starts and ends with keeping your liver clean, whether I say it or not. Your liver is the processor of all of your hormones. Your hormones tell your body every single signal and every single command, from sweating to building muscle to losing fat. So what happens is, when you think about this, I'll give you a little quick question since you're the doctor, right? If you have somebody who abuses alcohol, what is typically the main malady that afflicts them?
Yeah, we end up getting that cirrhosis, cirrhosis of the liver. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you have a 5-gallon bucket of paint and you have just 1 shot glass of red paint, so you have white paint in a 5-gallon bucket, 1 shot of red paint, and you just a little spill, you just mix it in and then paint the walls. What color are your walls? All
right, they're red.
Exactly. So just a little bit of alcohol is going to inhibit your liver function. I hate to be a party pooper.
Right. Well, if someone was thinking, then what is, if I wanted to get healthier, right? And I'm looking at this pyramid and I'm looking at the old pyramid, what diet, if they were just to ask you, what should I be doing right now? What would you recommend their diet look like?
The first thing I would tell them to do, don't look at the pyramid. All right. Listen to me. Look at your plate. Forget triangles. Think about a circle. Think about your plate as a pie chart. And if half of that plate is vegetables, ideally raw vegetables, i.e. salad. But, if it's cooked vegetables, that's cool. But if you can get like raw vegetables, if you don't have raw vegetables, maybe a combination of some vegetables, like a veggie platter, a veggie tray, sampling, and some fruit, make that half of your plate, 50%. The next 50%, make that cooked vegetables. That last 50%, that last 25%, I'm getting my math wrong. So 50% raw vegetables, fruit, 25% cooked vegetables. That last 25%, make that a responsibly sourced protein. You're cooking with grease. And then one thing that the pyramid does say that I absolutely co-sign on, you touched on when you talk about alcohol, drink more water, drink less sodas, drink less sugary drinks. Those sugary drinks, even when they say they're sugar-free, if it tastes sweet to you, trust your taste buds, not the packaging, because that means that there's some kind of sugar substitute in there, and our bodies don't know how to discern the difference between those. It may not raise your glycemic index if you're diabetic, but once your body starts processing it, it's all going to turn to glucose.